Iskuim na kai naknimi na sarkari.
Chapter 28. In dreams is woven the truth that the day dares not speak. Sunlight slipped through the curtains, brushing Ealasaid's face like invisible fingers waking long-forgotten memories. She opened her eyes slowly, as though emerging from an ancient dream. She didn't remember when she'd closed them, but a deep sense of peace wrapped around her, as if she'd slept for centuries. She stretched her arms gently. The light filling the room was warm, almost golden, and for a moment she felt untethered from time. It wasn't her chamber, yet the place felt vaguely familiar. A lit hearth cast reddish flickers against the stone walls, and the crackle of the fire was the only sound breaking the sacred stillness of the space. On the mantel, a small chest caught her eye. Its shape, its color, the way the light gleamed on its surface, everything about it stirred something her memory couldn't yet grasp. She tried to recall, and slowly fragments began to take shape. Beltane, the music, the fires, the laughter of the people, Evander by the pond, her body entwined with his. Then a flash. A whistle. The arrow. A choked sob escaped her lips as it all came back. The image of Evander, his chest exposed, the bow drawn, the iron tip aimed straight at his heart. Had it been real? Had it struck him? She tried to sit up, but a warm, firm hand stopped her. She turned her head, and there he was, standing beside the bed, like a vision she wasn't yet ready to believe. "You're alive," she whispered, her throat dry, her voice cracked with emotion. Evander smiled, a soft curve of his lips that unraveled the knot in her chest in an instant. "Thanks to you," Anya said. "You're the one who saved me." The memory returned like a tide. She, throwing herself between him and the arrow. The impact. The silence. The cold. Was she dead? The thought didn't frighten her. If she had died saving him, it felt like a glorious fate. But Evander shook his head, as if he had read her mind. "You're safe. Your body just needed rest." He sat beside her, still holding her hand, and for the first time Ealasaid felt the warmth of his skin, the life pulsing through his touch. "Are you thirsty?" She nodded. Evander rose slowly, poured a glass of water and returned. He helped her drink, and the cool liquid soothed her throat as he gently wiped her brow with a cloth. "Don't ever do something so reckless again," he said, his voice more worried than scolding. She looked at him, surprised, and her answer came with quiet firmness. "My life isn't worth more than yours. If I had to choose again, I'd do the same." She sat up carefully. Her body felt strange, as if the arrow had never touched her. She touched her abdomen, searching for a trace, a pain, but found nothing. Just smooth skin. No bandages. No scar. "Did it just graze me?" she asked, confused. Evander didn't answer right away. His eyes held shadows, like he hadn't slept in days. "You look like a ghost," she murmured, brushing his cheek with a faint smile. He laughed, but it was a quiet sound, dulled by exhaustion. "You can't imagine how much I feared losing you." "How long?" 6 days. The number didn't seem real. She looked at her hands, her unharmed body. 6 days asleep? Did I have a fever? No. You just slept. As if your soul needed to retreat and heal in silence. The tenderness in his voice made her hold her breath. Evander looked at her like she was something sacred. And then from the echoes of her memory, a phrase rose clear and bright. "You love me." It wasn't a question. It was a certainty settling in her chest like a sprout breaking through the soil. Evander brushed her cheek with his fingertips, as if stroking a sigh. "More than anything in this world," Anya said. She smiled, just a little. "I had to stand in front of an arrow for you to love me." He closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, they were filled with something deeper than sorrow. "Don't ever do something that reckless again." Ealasaid wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him gently, unhurried. "I would do it again. And again. Because you're alive. And that's enough. Evander rested his forehead against hers. His breath was steady, his voice a whisper. I almost lost you. I can't bear that thought. Not again. A soft voice interrupted the intimacy of the moment. It's time for the infusion. Ealasaid turned her head slowly, still wrapped in Evander's arms. She didn't want to let go. Not now. Not when at last she knew life still belonged to them. Ealasaid startled. A figure had appeared beside the bed, as softly as mist settling over the earth. It was Siofra. Ealasaid studied her closely. She immediately recognized the hair as white as dawn frost, and the crown of wildflowers that seemed alive, still vibrant despite the passage of time. She didn't remember seeing her enter. And yet there she was, as if she'd always been there. I know you, Ealasaid murmured, frowning as the fog in her mind began to lift. We met in the forest, weeks ago. Siofra nodded slowly, her eyes as clear as winter ice. I'm Siofra, she said, her voice as soft as the breeze drifting through trees. And suddenly, everything around her seemed less real. More dreamlike. The arrow, it struck me. I remember the pain. I was naked, inside a circle. I don't understand. A thunderclap tore through the air, cutting her words short. Ealasaid turned her head toward the window. The sky was clear, not a single cloud. The spirits of nature intervened, said Siofra, as if answering a thought rather than a question. They offered you a second chance. But their gift isn't free. The secret must be kept. Ealasaid looked at her, not fully understanding. Who are you? She asked, though part of her already knew. Evander was the one who answered, his voice low. She raised me, until my 7th winter. Ealasaid then remembered the words he had once shared about his childhood, about his loneliness, but he had never said who had watched over him. Now she understood why. You are, she began, but Siofra interrupted with a half-smile, enigmatic. A witch, she said without hesitation, and in her voice was a blend of ancient pride and ancestral mystery. Ealasaid swallowed hard. The story she'd heard since she was a child about wise women who spoke to trees and listened to the moon, she never thought she'd meet one. Nature never gives anything without asking something in return, Siofra went on, her eyes fixed on Ealasaid, intense as an omen. And you will have to pay a price. What price? Ealasaid asked, uneasy. Siofra didn't answer. Her lips curved slightly. It's not mine to say. You'll know when the time comes. Then she turned to Evander with quiet tenderness. She's healed now. It's time to go, son. Evander nodded solemnly, as if that word, son, still carried weight in his chest. Will you introduce me to your daughter? Siofra asked suddenly, her eyes resting on Ealasaid's belly. Ealasaid froze. She looked at Evander in disbelief. Am I pregnant? Yes, Siofra answered, and her smile held the serenity of one who sees beyond time. It's a girl. The spirits want her to live. Teach her to love the earth, the water, the wind. Let her be worthy too. Still stunned, Ealasaid could only nod. The dizziness of the unknown mingled with an immense tenderness, blooming in her chest like the first light of dawn. I'll take care of her, she said, and her voice trembled as if sealing an oath. Evander took her hand, steady and warm. And I'll protect you both. Ealasaid looked at him, and in his eyes she saw the promise already kept before it was ever spoken. When she turned back to find Siofra, the room was empty. No trace of her. Only the echo of her presence lingered in the air. The door was still closed. How? She whispered, not finishing the question. Evander let out a lopsided smile. She likes doing that. Ealasaid looked at him curiously. She's like a mother to you, isn't she? He lowered his gaze, thoughtful. She cared more for me than my own mother did, he replied softly, his voice filled with nostalgic love. Ealasaid rested her head on his shoulder, smiling sweetly. And you? Are you a warlock? Evander laughed, a warm sound that broke the spell of the moment. Shofra taught me a few tricks, but don't worry. I won't use them on you. She laughed too, and for the first time in days, she felt whole. I'll protect our daughter with my life, she said in a faint voice, firm despite the tremble. Evander looked at her with devotion, intertwining his fingers with hers. I'll protect you both, he repeated, and in his voice there was no doubt, only love. A smile lit up Ealasaid's face. In that moment, everything felt possible. Real. Sacred. And then the room seemed to grow still again, as if the world were holding its breath. Evander stared into the empty space, as if he still felt Siofra's shadow beside him. Then he turned to her, and without warning took her hand with renewed seriousness. Will you marry me, Ealasaid? She looked at him, and she knew she didn't need to think. Yes, she replied with a conviction that stirred the air between them. But I don't want to wait. We must go to the court. Evander raised an eyebrow, amused, then shook his head gently. We'll marry here. In the clan. Where it all began. Ealasaid sighed, a quiet gesture, but her heart understood that the place didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was the promise they had made to each other long before words were ever spoken. Not all strength is forged from steel. Sometimes the greatest kind is born from breaking, and allowing something new to grow from the fracture. Ealasaid had always been strong. A quiet, restrained strength learned over time. The kind that comes from needing nothing, from walking alone, from trusting only her own heartbeat. Pain to her was something distant. A threat that could be kept at bay with discipline, with pride, with distance. But when the arrow tore through her flesh, something deeper shattered, the illusion that she could handle everything on her own, without support, without surrender. Shofra told her about the little beings of the forest, about spirits who had saved her. And about a price. A cleansing. Not as punishment but as balance. As if nature understood that in order to go on living, something within her had to die. Then she understood that true healing wasn't about becoming who she used to be. It was about becoming who she was meant to be, now. Her body ached, yes. But the greater pain was having to stop. Having to listen. Having to look at the parts of herself she had always hidden, even from herself, the lonely child. The weary woman. The soul still afraid of being loved. And in that pain, something sacred began to take root. As if the breaking had opened cracks where light could pour in. As if the wound were not a curse but a doorway. Because deep healing doesn't always arrive wrapped in beauty. Sometimes it smells of damp earth, of dried blood, of silent tears in the middle of the night. Sometimes it's dark, uncomfortable, nearly unbearable. But it is also real. And real is the only way to begin again. She would never have chosen any of this. But now she understands, it had to happen. Because without the wound, without the surrender, she would never have known love. Not her own, not another's, not the kind that hums in the earth when one finally stops resisting. And so in the heart of her fragility, she knew she was alive. Chapter 29. Destiny speaks softly, only those who pause to listen hear it. Are you going to wear the dress you brought from England? Asked Marsaili, watching her with curiosity. 10 days had passed since Evander and Ealasaid had agreed to marry. She had wanted the wedding to happen sooner, but he insisted on waiting until she was fully recovered. Although Ealasaid felt well, Evander made her rest several more days. At night they slept together, but it wasn't until 2 days ago that she managed to seduce him. Though he feared hurting her, Ealasaid refused to back down, and at last they shared a moment of intimacy. She had no intention of going through her pregnancy without physical closeness to her betrothed. I'll marry in Rutherford colours, Ealasaid replied, her voice steady. Since arriving at the clan she had worn her own dresses, but now she finally felt like part of the Rutherfords. The cloak she wore, dyed in hues familiar to the clan, was a symbol of her belonging. Marsaili nodded with a smile. Are you nervous? Tomorrow will be a special day. Get a good night's sleep, advised Isbael, watching her daughter play on the blanket in the grass, her tiny hands waving in the air. You won't sleep tomorrow. And you'll need to give my daughter a friend, she added with a wink. Ealasaid looked toward the nearby pond. The day was warm and calm, and the place seemed to offer enough peace to soothe the little one. The three women sat in the grass. She hesitated for a moment, debating whether to share with Isbael and Marsaili that Grania would soon have a friend. Ealasaid believed the girl would find companionship not only among the animals she would teach her to love, but also within the Rutherford clan, where she would be cherished and respected. But she said nothing. She couldn't, not yet. What Shofra had told her still left her unsettled. Evander, however, was certain of the truth in her words. Ealasaid had promised to keep the secret, and so she would. I'll do what I can, she said with a smile. Even though she felt deeply happy, a shadow hovered over her joy, the absence of her parents and brother at the wedding. Evander had promised to take her to England when it was possible, but Ealasaid longed for them to visit her first. I'm going to take Grania to the stronghold, Isbael announced, pulling her from her thoughts. It's starting to cool, and I don't want her to catch a chill. Ealasaid nodded, though the air was still warm. Grania was so small, and she understood Isbael's protective instinct. Go with her, Marsaili, she asked, but her maid shook her head. You're still recovering. I don't want to leave you alone. I'm not alone, Ealasaid replied, nodding toward the warriors watching them from a distance. Marsaili doesn't need to come, Sorli will, said Isbael, rising with Grania in her arms. Ewan will stay with you, she added, pointing to one of the guards. Ealasaid nodded. Evander still hadn't discovered who had fired the arrow that nearly took her life, so he insisted she never go anywhere unaccompanied. Struan had made the same demand of Isbael. Though it sometimes irritated her, she understood the need for caution. After saying goodbye, Isbael and Grania walked away with Sorli. A squirrel approached Ealasaid and perched on her leg. In recent days, the animals had grown even more trusting of her. As if they no longer doubted they were safe in her presence. Could it be the presence of her little one that changed their behavior? Without thinking, Ealasaid placed a hand on her belly, though she quickly withdrew it when she noticed Marsaili watching. But Marsaili was focused on the squirrel. She's beautiful, isn't she? Ealasaid asked. Marsaili shrugged. Much cuter than the mouse that climbed onto your lap this morning. Ealasaid burst out laughing. Although she had always been surrounded by animals, even she found it odd for a squirrel to approach without fear. The squirrel let out a sound, almost like a whimper, and looked toward the trees. Is something worrying you? Ealasaid asked, uneasy. The squirrel flicked its tail, tense, glancing repeatedly toward the forest. All right, I'll walk you to your nest, she said, standing up. The squirrel gave a quick nod, and Ealasaid, without hesitation, headed toward the forest, not needing Marsaili to follow. When she noticed Ewan approaching, she said, You don't need to follow me. I'm just walking the squirrel home. I won't go far. Ewan, used to Ealasaid's oddities, nodded but kept an eye on her. She stepped into the woods, following the squirrel. The wind whispered through the leaves, and birdsong mingled with the crunch of undergrowth beneath her feet. Suddenly the squirrel stopped, frozen. Ealasaid mirrored it, her heartbeat quickening. Something wasn't right. Suddenly, a figure emerged from behind a tree, cradling a baby squirrel in his arms. This bond you have with animals. I knew it would lead you here, said a male voice. Ealasaid didn't recognize the man. He had long dark hair. Her face tightened. The man's arms wrapped around her, and for a brief moment everything seemed to spin again. But the sound of a scream shattered the moment. Ealasaid, run. It was Marsaili, and the terror in her voice made Ealasaid pull away from the man. But he grabbed her by the neck with force, and Ealasaid's world slipped into darkness. Chapter 30. Love asks for no guarantees, only truth. Waking up in an unfamiliar place with no memory of how she got there was becoming an irritating habit for Ealasaid. She rose from the bed, realizing her clothes had been changed. She was no longer wearing the Rutherford mantle, but a simple brown dress worn and patched. She looked around the room for clues about where she was. The floral curtains and the silver-polished mirror on the table suggested the place belonged to a woman. She approached the door. She tugged at it, but it was locked from the outside. She wasn't surprised, though a sigh escaped her lips. Her eyes scanned the room for anything that might help her escape. She noticed a trunk at the foot of the bed. She opened it. What she found inside left no doubt: the room belonged to a woman. Brushes, dresses, shoes, veils, and headpieces filled the space. The items were luxurious, indicating the owner must be someone important. Suddenly, the door opened. Ealasaid dropped the dress she was holding and put it back in the trunk. A man, different from the one who had abducted her, stepped inside and shut the door behind him. "You can keep the dresses. They belonged to my daughter. I'm Laird MacAlpin, the master of this stronghold. I believe you know her. Her name is Isbale," he said with irony. Was he Isbel's father? It shouldn't surprise her, knowing the Rutherfords and the MacAlpins were at war. Ealasaid studied him. The man looked bitter, full of hatred. His eyes held a coldness that chilled her to the bone, and something else, a hint of madness. "Your father will become my ally." "My father would never do that. He has a son." Ealasaid brought a hand to her mouth, trying to contain her pain. Donal MacAlpin looked at her with a malicious smile. "Aidan is dead," Ealasaid whispered, her voice broken. "Did you kill him? Was it you?" "I didn't mean to upset you, Ealasaid," the laird said mockingly. "Aidan is alive, but your parents believe he isn't." The relief at hearing her brother was alive was instant, but how could she trust his word? She couldn't. "I don't understand." "Your brother used to go to the river to watch the fish. A month ago, during a visit, I saw him slip and fall into the water. I tried to save him, but the currents took him. I was a hero," he said, laughing. "Of course he never fell. I paid a man to put him in a sack and take him away. Your parents searched for him, but eventually accepted his death." Ealasaid was flooded with rage. She wanted to strike him, but knew it would do no good. She needed to be clever. "Where is Aidan?" "He's here, safe and sound. But you'll meet my demands if you want him to stay that way." "And what are those demands?" "You will marry my son and become our lady." "You won't succeed. You won't. The MacAlpins have spread the rumor that you ran away from a fiancé who mistreated you. Evander would never harm me. They'll take you to England, where Windmere will recognize you and do what's necessary to secure the castle. I'll present myself as mediator, and your father will believe me." Ealasaid knew it was all possible. She took a deep breath and forced herself to stay calm. "And Aidan? Aidan will live as long as you behave like a submissive wife. No servant chores, no talking to animals." Ealasaid bit her tongue to keep from cursing. She couldn't risk letting him suspect anything. "Leave Aidan at Clan Rutherford. Isbale will take care of him." Donal MacAlpin let out a maniacal laugh. "Aidan stays here. And if you behave, you'll get to visit him once a year." Ealasaid knew he was lying, but there was nothing she could do. Owen had already lost his mind. "You're a miserable man," she said, furious. "Why are you doing this?" "For power," Ealasaid. "It's always been about power." "I'll do what you ask," she said tensely. As long as he believed she was giving in, she might still have a chance to save Aidan. Donal smiled triumphantly and left the room, leaving her alone. Ealasaid knew one thing for certain: if there was anything she would never do, it was to surrender without a fight. Chapter 31. Some answers only come to us while we sleep. The minutes dragged on, endless, and Ealasaid felt a growing desperation. She knew she had to come up with a plan to save her brother, but her mind was clouded, unable to find a way out. When the door opened, she expected to see Aidan, but instead Donal appeared once more, dressed in his clan's colors. His blue eyes, so familiar, made her think of Isbale. Your daughter is still waiting to be reunited with you. I have no daughter. Donal MacAlpin's voice was sharp, leaving no room for argument. I've come to assure you that your brother is in no danger. Did he think his words could deceive her? You promised me that. Donal looked at her intently, as if searching deeper than her answer. And you believed me. Ealasaid didn't reply. If you think your brother is in danger, you'll jeopardize my deal with Niall Tavish of Windmere. Why would you make a pact with an English baron? Because my current allies are unreliable, and I need support for my war against the Rutherfords. You should be grateful to be spared a marriage with Evander Rutherford. We saved you from a miserable life. Ealasaid wanted to scream that she loved Evander, that he was an honorable man, but she couldn't take that risk. If Donal realized how much she meant to Evander, he might use her for his gain. He only cares about the dowry my father gave him, she lied, the words burning on her lips. Lying to Donal was easier than telling the truth. My life will be miserable either way. The laird was about to answer, but a child burst into the room, running toward Ealasaid. She knelt down and wrapped him tightly in her arms. Aidan, are you all right? She asked, but he didn't reply, simply rested his head against her chest. He's fine, Donal MacAlpin interrupted. And if you hold up your end of the bargain, he'll stay that way. I'll care for him as my own son. You have my word. Ealasaid hesitated, but she had no choice. As long as her brother was safe, everything else could wait. I'll do my part, she assured him. After the laird left, Ealasaid tried to pull her brother back to look at him, but he clung to her. With effort, she finally got him to meet her gaze. Aidan sniffled, trying to hold back tears. I wasn't brave, he said through sobs. They put me in a sack. I screamed. I think I cried until I fell asleep. You were very brave, Aidan, said Ealasaid, choking back the tears threatening to fall. She had to be strong. For him. For their mother. For all that was still to come. The bravest boy I know. The boy hugged her again, trembling like a leaf. Ealasaid spent hours comforting him, until he finally fell asleep. She stroked his hair, lay beside him, and despite the exhaustion, sleep overtook her. To her surprise, the nightmares didn't come that night. Deep in her heart, she knew everything would be all right. Kindness and love would always prevail. Ealasaid, wake up. Marsaili's voice pulled her from the edge of sleep. For a moment, she thought the horrors of the previous night had just been a bad dream. But the warmth of the small body resting on her chest brought her fully back. Aidan was sleeping peacefully, perhaps for the first time in weeks. How did you get here? She asked, surprised. They kidnapped me too, said Marsaili, her voice trembling. Her eyes were shining with unshed tears. They killed Ewan. Ealasaid didn't know the warrior, but the news struck her heart. How could they be so cruel? How could they kill innocent men? Without waking Aidan, she stood and embraced Marsaili. I'm so sorry, Marsaili, she whispered, pulling back. I'm sorry I dragged you into this. It's not your fault, Ealasaid, Marsaili replied, though Ealasaid felt the weight of it on her shoulders. That laird is insane, Marsaili whispered. He locked me in the dungeons. He said I'm to accompany you, and be your maid. You're not going anywhere. I'll help you escape during the journey back. Evander and Orlais will find us, said Marsaili. The maid who brought me food in the dungeons used to live in my village. She married a MacAlpin before the war. She was a friend of my mother, and recognized me. She can't help us without risking her children, but she'll do what she can to alert Evander. For the first time since her abduction, Ealasaid smiled. Evander will find us. Marsaili nodded with conviction. He will. Chapter 32. Sometimes love arrives like an echo of what once was, other times like a premonition of what does not yet exist. Ealasaid felt like they were being watched. Ever since she had left MacAlpin lands, she hadn't been able to shake the feeling that Evander was close. His presence wrapped around her, an invisible thread tying her to him. She didn't need words to explain it, something beyond the visible connected them. She had delayed her journey to England by 4 days, feigning illness. Donal believed her, the fool. He thought Ealasaid was a woman without malice, kind-hearted, and maybe that's who she had once been. But not anymore. She still held on to her kindness, but now she had become something stronger, someone willing to do anything for the ones she loved. Deep down, Ealasaid had trusted that the maid who knew Marsaili had managed to warn Evander. She couldn't know for sure, her handmaid hadn't been able to contact her again, but now as the hours passed, that doubt had turned into certainty. Especially minutes ago, when a flash of steel between the trees and a whisper that wasn't the wind confirmed what she had already sensed. The signs were barely perceptible, even for seasoned warriors. But Ealasaid, more attuned than ever to nature, noticed what others missed.
"Throw yourself off the horse," she whispered to Marsaili as they approached a small clearing surrounded by trees, a perfect spot for an ambush.
Marsaili looked at her in surprise. Ealasaid gestured toward the clearing with her chin, and the maid's eyes lit up with recognition of the danger. "I don't think I can," she whispered, careful not to be heard by the Macalpan warriors escorting them. "Donal's right-hand man is a fool, but not so foolish as to believe I simply fell off a horse," Ealasaid said, glancing ahead where the laird rode confidently, certain the women were too weak to pose any threat. Marsaili sighed. She knew it was her only option. She had looked unsteady from the start, barely able to sit upright. After crossing herself, she tugged the reins and let herself fall, hitting her arm and twisting her right ankle. A cry of pain made the warriors stop their horses, and Owen looked back. Ealasaid dismounted and rushed to Marsaili.
"Pretend you can't get up," she whispered in her ear.
"I don't need to pretend," Marsaili replied, tears shining in her eyes. "Can you help us?" Ealasaid asked the warriors. One of them knelt to examine Marsaili's ankle, which she clutched with a pained expression. While he did, Ealasaid seized a nearby stone and struck the man on the head. He cried out but didn't lose consciousness. He raised his arm to strike back, but a well-aimed arrow pierced his heart. 3 warriors burst from the trees with lightning speed. Ealasaid recognized the one in front, Evander, sword in hand. The man who had captured Ealasaid tried to use her as a shield, but she bit his arm hard. He shoved her violently, and she hit the ground dazed. The sound of clashing swords and cries reached her like distant echoes, but Ealasaid could barely focus. She covered her ears, trying to muffle the ringing in her head. When she managed to recover, she looked up. The 2 Macalpan warriors lay dead, but there was no sign of Donal's man. "If you don't want her dead, hand over Ealasaid and leave." Duncan, Donal's right hand, shouted, his voice edged with desperation. Ealasaid lifted her head with difficulty. There he was, holding Marsaili as a shield, a knife at her throat.
"Let her go,"
Orlais roared. Beside him, Struan placed a hand on his shoulder to calm him, his voice full of urgency. "Don't hurt her, Duncan." "I'll go with you," Ealasaid pleaded, standing unsteadily. Evander grabbed her waist and pulled her behind him. "Evander, please," she murmured, not wanting Marsaili to suffer more because of her. "Don't move," Evander ordered firmly. Marsaili, terrified, couldn't put weight on her injured foot. If not for Duncan, she would have collapsed. Ealasaid realized her friend had no escape. She couldn't distract Duncan, she could barely stand.
"Let me go with him."
"You'll save me again," she whispered to Evander, low enough that only he could hear. "Take the knife I keep in my boot. Give it to me." Evander responded in the same low tone, while Struan kept trying to negotiate with Donal, who was growing increasingly nervous. "No one else has to die," Ealasaid said, her voice soft but resolute. She didn't want more death, didn't want more suffering. Evander tightened his arm around her. "For once in your life, obey me," Ealasaid. "I won't lose you."
"That's not going to happen."
His voice was laced with desperation, and Ealasaid couldn't bring herself to defy him. Duncan watched the exchange, but he couldn't see Ealasaid. Evander's body shielded her. "She belongs to me. The Yorkshire lands will be my Laird Donal's." Hatred surged in Ealasaid's chest at those words. How had she been so blind? Donal had only used her for his own gain. With trembling hands, she took the knife and placed it in Evander's palm. He took it and quickly passed it to her, hiding it from Duncan. Ealasaid is the most intelligent and noble woman I've ever known, Evander said fiercely. You don't even deserve to breathe the same air as her. Evander hurled the knife at Duncan's arm, wounding him instantly. Duncan screamed in pain, dropping the blade. Marsaili collapsed, but in a swift motion rolled away from him. Time seemed to freeze. Ealasaid couldn't hold back. She threw herself into Evander's arms, crying for her friend, watching Ole run to Marsaili and embrace her. When the sobs quieted, Struan's voice cut through the silence. Then the only sound was a sword piercing flesh. The clearing went quiet. Ealasaid looked up to see Ole holding Marsaili in his arms. A strange calm settled over her. Then she remembered Aidan. Were you able to free my brother? She asked Evander, her voice shaking. Evander shook his head, his voice steady but filled with concern. No, Ealasaid. I can't enter Windmere's stronghold without risking my men's lives and your brother's. He'll kill him once he learns Donal's man is dead, Ealasaid said, stricken. He's only 8 years old. Evander looked at her, determination in his eyes. I'll find a way to save him. Though Evander spoke with conviction, Ealasaid knew uncertainty lingered behind his words. I'll go speak to MacAlpin. I'll try to reach an agreement, she said, resolute though her heart trembled. She couldn't let her brother die. No, Ealasaid. You'll return to Rutherford Keep. I won't let you or my daughter be in danger again, Evander said, gently touching her belly. A distant sound put Evander on alert. It took Ealasaid a few seconds to identify it, a subtle vibration in the ground growing rapidly. Soon it became the rhythmic thunder of hooves pounding the earth with purpose. Are they your men? She asked, her voice tense. No, Evander replied, instinctively placing her behind him to shield her with his body. The laird drew his sword, and Struan followed suit. Ole, however, remained beside Marsaili, holding her with desperation. The galloping blended with the cracking of branches under the horse's weight, and the brittle rustling of dry leaves. Ealasaid could also hear the deep snorts of the animals. They were close.
But she wasn't afraid.
After everything she had endured, even fear seemed to have left her. She raised her eyes to the sky and through the branches saw a bird with blue wings gliding overhead. She couldn't explain it, but the sight filled her with unexpected calm, as if the bird came to announce the danger had passed. She stepped forward, emerging from behind Evander, just as 4 riders burst into the clearing. One of them dismounted with practiced ease. He wore the colors of her clan, though Ealasaid didn't recognize them. Evander Rutherford, the man greeted with a measured smile. A pleasure to see you again. Ealasaid studied him carefully. He was tall, blonde, brown-eyed. Not strikingly handsome, but there was a rugged allure about him that she imagined could easily lead many women into sin. Evander narrowed his eyes, and after a short silence recognition flickered across his face. Bran McTavish, he said coldly, almost disdainfully. Have you come to avenge your allies' men? Bran glanced at the corpses without flinching. But at the sight of Duncan's body, a grimace of distaste finally crossed his face. From what I hear, they kidnapped your betrothed. There's no honor in killing women or taking them by force. They got what they deserve. And yet you still call the one who did this your ally, Evander replied bitterly. Bran let out a short laugh. You think you're better than me? He asked, not giving time for an answer. You join forces with half of Scotland just to stand against me.
At least I don't pretend.
You chose the most vile man in the Highlands. And your men killed 2 of mine. I never gave that order. There's no honor in betrayal. If I wanted to kill you, I'd do it face to face. And you'd die, Evander said coolly, sheathing his sword. He gestured to Struan to do the same, seeing that the newcomers hadn't drawn theirs. Bran smiled calmly. I do not fear an honorable death. Then if you're not here for revenge, what do you want?
I heard you're getting married soon.
I've brought a gift that should please your bride-to-be. He raised a hand, and one of his men who had stayed farther back nudged his horse forward. He pulled back a blanket covering his lap, and Ealasaid gasped at what it concealed. "Is he dead?" she cried, tearing free from Evander's grip and running toward him. "It was not my intent to alarm you, milady," Bran said, his sincerity seeming genuine. "Your brother is asleep. The journey exhausted him." Ealasaid didn't breathe until she brought a hand to his nose and felt his slow, steady breath. "Aiden, wake up," she whispered, stroking his hair. The boy opened his eyes, still drowsy. "Ealasaid," he murmured. Evander approached and lifted him off the horse. Aiden eyed him warily, but Ealasaid offered a reassuring smile. The moment his feet touched the ground, he ran into her arms. "I missed you. Don't leave me alone again," he begged through tears. Ealasaid held him so tightly she feared she might smother him, but Aiden clung even harder. "Never again," she promised, stroking his hair. Then she looked up at Bran. That man had saved her brother. "Thank you for bringing him back," she said with heartfelt gratitude. "It was my pleasure, milady," Bran replied, mounting his imposing brown stallion once more. "My dealings with Donal MacAlpin are finished. I don't keep alliances with those who act in shadows, and especially not with those who deal with the English." "And what do you want in return?" Evander asked warily.
"That I break my alliances and join you in a suicidal campaign?
"Or just owe you a favor?" Bran grinned, amused. "I don't need you, Rutherford. And I fear neither you nor all your clans combined." He signaled to his men, and they turned their mounts, obeying without hesitation. Evander watched him leave, frowning. "I don't like owing favors." Bran turned back for a moment, wearing an ambiguous smile. "Let me cross Roxburghshire when the king grants you that land, after your wedding to his bastard daughter," he said, nodding subtly toward Ealasaid. And without another word he spurred his horse and vanished behind his men. Chapter 33.
The forest teaches what the voice cannot say.
"You have changed, and that is sacred." That's how Ealasaid heard it, on a moonless night, among the trees that no longer frightened her. She didn't know if it was the wind or some ancient voice that had lived inside her since before memory.
But she understood.
She needed no more proof, no more wounds. She had already passed through the forest. She had already held the dagger and the trembling. She had already loved, even when she wasn't sure it would be returned. The hidden world, the one that had always called to her in dreams, had revealed its secrets without demanding a final offering. Because the true offering had been her surrender. Her yielding to what she could not control. Her ability to hear fear without obeying it. She was no longer alone. And not because someone stood beside her, but because her soul had been rewoven, wider, more porous, more alive. She understood then that her gift was not speaking with animals, nor seeing in the shadows what others feared.
Her gift was knowing how to return. Return to her body.
Return to the earth. Return to love. And stay. When they arrived at the fortress, Ealasaid tucked Aiden into bed. Then she made her way to Isbel's room to tell her he was safe. She found her with Struan. Not wanting to interrupt the moment, she quickly left and headed to the pond. She sat on the grass, the midday sun blazing down, warming the Highlands in all their splendor. Despite the long journey, she didn't feel tired. The weight of recent emotions still kept her on edge. When she heard footsteps, she knew it was Evander, though she didn't look at him. Not even when he sat beside her. "Isn't there anything you want to ask me?" Evander broke the silence. "My father is the Baron of Yorkshire, and my mother the Baroness," he replied, eyes fixed on the water. Evander looked at her and gently took her chin, tilting it so she would face him. "Did you know your mother didn't give birth to you?" he asked in a low voice. "I suspected it," Ealasaid admitted. "I saw the signs. I didn't resemble my parents. I overheard my mother talking to the healer when she was pregnant with Aiden. She said it was her first pregnancy. I didn't want to think about it. I convinced myself I'd misheard. She used to say children don't always look like their parents.
But now I can't deny it anymore.
Is my father the King of Scotland? She asked, her voice trembling. He is, Evander confirmed. Who was the woman who gave birth to me? I don't know, he replied with regret. All I know is that she died giving birth to you. She must have been the daughter of a baron or someone important at the English court, because when she died, King Henry took you in and entrusted you to the barons of Yorkshire. Ealasaid fell silent, and seeing her expression, Evander sighed. It was time to tell her everything. I knew who your real father was when I blackmailed Queen Eleanor into granting me your hand. How did you know? She asked, gently moving Evander's finger from her chin. Evander felt his chest tighten. She wasn't angry, he could see that, but she was devastated, disappointed. That look pierced him more than any rebuke. King William signed 3 documents acknowledging you as his illegitimate daughter, and granting you a dowry. One is in his possession, another with Eleanor, and the third. Joffre gave it to me. I don't know how she got it. She never answers when she doesn't want to. Ealasaid didn't react. The documents meant little to her. Evander knew he had to say more, though it would hurt her even more. Your dowry is the land of Roxburghshire. It borders my territory. Currently it belongs to King William, and his soldiers don't let anyone cross it. If I had it, I'd gain a real advantage in my war with the MacAlpins. The land is fertile, highly profitable. It would bring wealth to my clan. Ealasaid looked at him, her eyes locked on his. For a moment, Evander wasn't sure if she was even listening. He leaned in and stroked her cheek, but she turned her face away. Ealasaid, please try to understand, he began. I thought I was valuable to you, for who I am. But I was wrong, she interrupted. I'm only valuable because of my dowry. Evander shook his head.
That's not true, Ealasaid.
He stopped when he saw the heartbreak in her expression. You're valuable to me because I love you. I'm grateful you're King William's illegitimate daughter, because if you weren't, I never would have met you. My life means nothing without you. You are my Ealasaid, the most wonderful woman I've ever known. I am nothing without you. Tears welled in Ealasaid's eyes, and Evander pulled her into his arms. She didn't resist. Don't hate me, Ealasaid, he whispered, running his fingers through her hair. Don't stop loving me. The plea in his voice made Ealasaid pull back and meet his gaze. Deep down, I'm grateful for your ambition too. I can't stop loving you, even if I wanted to. Evander pressed his lips to hers in a kiss filled with desperation, forgiveness, and above all, love. Will you tell William you don't want the land anymore? Ealasaid asked once the kiss ended. Why would I do that? He replied, caressing her cheek. Because marrying me without expecting anything in return would be a beautiful gesture of love. Evander looked at her, as if he couldn't believe what he'd just heard. I love you, Ealasaid. You and our baby, he said, touching her belly.
Love hasn't made me weaker, but it hasn't made me a fool either.
I'll claim Roxburghshire for our clan. You're impossible, she murmured, softly laughing. Or at least, Evander hoped it was a laugh. And yet you love me. And yet I love you, Ealasaid replied, her smile full of warmth.
And I want you.
Make love to me, Evander. Show me how much you love me. And he did, again and again. Epilogue. The soul knows when it has arrived home, even if the body still doubts. On her wedding day, Ealasaid proudly wore the colours of Clan Rutherford. The courtyard, decorated according to her wishes, offered a simple yet charming scene. Floral garlands hung from the walls, wooden benches waited for guests, and 2 long tables stretched out for the feast. She had decided not to marry in the small chapel, as the priest had refused to allow her beloved animals inside. And this, more than a ritual, was her special day. Her friends had to be present. From a corner of the courtyard, Eloan and Seren watched the scene unfold. A squirrel struggled with its baby, trying to keep it still. Birds fluttered among the tables, landing freely on chairs and benches. "This is the strangest wedding I've ever attended," remarked Struan, his eyes fixed on Isabel, who, holding Grania in her arms, was scolding one of the puppies for licking its brother. "And the happiest day of my life," replied Evander, also dressed in the clan's colors. Struan nodded, with a faint smile. "Where's the bride?" asked Rugri, scanning the courtyard. "Convincing her best man to let her put a flower collar on him," said Isabel, handing a drowsy Grania to Struan. "I'm going to check if the food is ready. Her parents went back to England with her brother. So who's the best man?" Rugri insisted. Evander didn't know what to say. The Yorkshires, upon learning the truth, had returned home with their son. Ealasaid had been told they weren't her real parents. King Henry, once a friend of the Baron of Yorkshire, had entrusted the girl to him with one simple request, that she be taught Scottish Gaelic. If they found it strange, they never let it show to the child they raised with love from the very first day. Ealasaid, in her usual grace, had assured them there was nothing to forgive. She was grateful. It had hurt her that they couldn't stay for the wedding. Although Niall Tavish of Windmere had backed down and withdrawn, the Baron foresaw reprisals and had to prepare his knights. War loomed on the horizon. Her mother, however, had promised to return when the baby was born. Ealasaid had confided in them about her pregnancy, and far from judging her for not being married, they had been overjoyed, as had Isabel. "Are my eyes deceiving me?" asked the priest standing behind the improvised altar, a wooden plank atop two empty beer barrels. The three men turned. Ealasaid was approaching, bouquet in hand, Branwen trotting at her side. "The best man is the dog?" Rugri asked, incredulous. "The best choice," Evander replied. His brother looked at him, expecting a joke, but found only sincerity. "You've lost your mind," Rugri muttered, clicking his tongue. "I've never been more sane," said Evander, just as Ealasaid looked at him with a smile that filled him with peace. That wedding might have seemed mad to the rest of the world. But to them, it was perfect. And that was all that mattered. One day after the wedding. "King William is in Roxburghshire," announced Struan. "He's requested permission to enter our lands." Evander and Ealasaid were having breakfast alone in the great hall. After their wedding night, they had slept in late. The laird tore his gaze from her and fixed it on Struan. "Don't grant it. Have you forgotten he's the king?" "He's just being diplomatic," Struan replied. "We should receive him, Evander," Ealasaid said gently. "No," he insisted, with his usual stubbornness. "We'll see him once you've given birth and recovered. He can wait." He knew his decision would bring consequences, but he didn't care. The king's wrath meant nothing to him, if Ealasaid's peace was at stake. "I want to speak with him," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "There are many questions I need to ask." Evander sighed. This was exactly what he feared, the answers. "Nothing will upset me," Ealasaid assured him. "The Yorkshires are my parents. I had a happy childhood, and now I'm married to the man I love. Our child will be born soon. What disturbs me isn't the truth, it's the doubts that haunt me. Do you want our baby to carry that burden? Or to come early because I'm anxious?" Struan covered his mouth, amused. Ealasaid had just used the same tactics on Evander that Isabel often used on him. Evander noticed too, and shot him a warning glance. "Fine. I'll let him in. But I'll be with you during the conversation." Ealasaid smiled and kissed his lips. "Thank you." King William watched the dog and the sleeping pups in front of the fireplace. He felt a strange unease, as if those animals were silent guardians ready to pounce if he uttered the wrong word. His men waited outside. He had requested to see the young woman alone, but when she appeared with her husband, he understood from the way the man's arm encircled her that separating them would be impossible. That Laird would kill for her without hesitation. And rather than discomforting him, the realization brought a faint smile to his lips. Ealasaid could not have found a better protector. "You wish to speak with me?" she asked, offering a slight curtsy before taking a seat across from the king. Evander remained standing, face stern, silent. "You are the very image of your mother," said William once he could clearly see her face. "Did she love me?" The question escaped Ealasaid before she could hold it back. "From the moment she knew she was expecting you. If she had not died in childbirth, she would have given her life for you." Ealasaid nodded softly. There was truth in his eyes. "You were born of love," the monarch added, and there was a trace of tenderness in his voice that surprised her. "I fell for your mother the moment I saw her. She was the most extraordinary woman I've ever known. But our fate had already been written, and not together. Because she was of humble birth. She was an English servant, sent to court out of necessity, not noble blood." Ealasaid raised an eyebrow. "You fell in love with a servant?" William gave a sad smile. "Who can control whom they love? The heart knows nothing of rank or lineage." Evander spoke then, his voice steady. "And why would King Henry take in the illegitimate daughter of a servant?" William lowered his gaze for a moment, before returning it to his daughter. "Because he feared for her life," he answered simply. "After your mother's death, I was caught between nobles demanding a legitimate heir, and the constant rumors. I didn't want to expose you to the cruelty of court. So I asked Henry for help. He was an ally, but more than that, a man who understood palace intrigue better than anyone. I begged him to protect you. And he agreed." Ealasaid swallowed, absorbing the truth. There were no shared bloodlines with the Plantagenets, no imperial conspiracies, only the decision of a king who for once acted as a father. "Did you have a happy childhood?" William asked, almost in a whisper. "The best," she answered without hesitation. "And you don't resent me for sending you away? Did you not want me?" The king sighed. His hands trembled slightly on his knees. "I wanted you more than I allowed myself to admit. But your mother asked me to keep you far from power, far from scandal. She didn't want you to bear the weight of my sin. She wanted you to grow up free." "She did it out of love," said Ealasaid, and her words were a balm to him. William nodded, wistfully. "I should have fought. But I convinced myself you'd be safer as the adopted daughter of an English baron, than as a bastard in the Scottish court. You weren't wrong. I wouldn't have been happy in a palace. I'm not made for a life of rules and masks." "You're like her," the king said, his voice thick with emotion. "With a heart that holds so much. Are you happy with Evander Rutherford?" Ealasaid looked at her husband, then at the king with a sincere smile. "The happiest woman." "We love each other, your majesty." William turned to Evander. "You have my blessing, laird." "Thank you," said Evander plainly, but with the conviction of a man who valued an honest gesture. The king smiled relieved and looked once more at Ealasaid. "I've made many mistakes. But giving you to a man who knew how to love and protect you wasn't one of them." Ealasaid laced her fingers with Evander's. "It's the greatest gift you could have given me." Soon after the king departed, not without first making Ealasaid promise that she would one day visit him at court. That very afternoon, he officially granted Roxburghshire to Evander. Such a gesture should have filled the laird with pride, but he could only think of her. "Did William's words affect you?" he asked that night, as she rested on his chest after they had made love. "They brought me peace," Ealasaid whispered, eyes closed, one hand over her heart. Evander traced his fingers down her bare back. "You're more important than I ever imagined. Bastard daughter of the King of Scotland, raised in England, now a woman of the clan." Ealasaid lifted her head to look at him. "I'm just a woman," she said calmly. "But now I understand why I always knew I had to marry for love. I come from a story shaped by impossible loves. Someone had to break the curse." Evander smiled and gently stroked her cheek. "I'm glad I was the man who helped you do it." "And I'm glad it was you," Ealasaid replied softly. "Ealasaid," he murmured, holding her gently as he guided her over him. "Love me, Evander," she whispered before sealing his lips with hers. There are returns that don't lead back to where you started. They bring the soul home. Ealasaid didn't return the same. Something in her had unraveled, an old way of resisting, of fighting what was inevitable, and in that empty space something new had taken root, truth. Her truth. She no longer feared the dark or the whispers of the unseen. She no longer needed to understand everything with words. Because she had learned to read the language of the soul. Her dreams were no longer warnings but maps. The forest creatures looked at her with newfound recognition, as if she were no longer just a guest in the hidden realm, but part of its sacred rhythm. The earth knew her. The wind returned her name with tenderness. There was no ceremony, no temples, no chants. But in her heart, she knew she had crossed a threshold. She had returned, yes, but to a different life. One where love was neither a cage nor a promise, but a quiet flame that burns without demanding. Evander was not her destiny. He was her companion, in the destiny she had chosen for herself. And that love, as deep as the earth, needed no declaration. It was enough to stay. To breathe. To open her hands and receive. Because only those who have descended to their depths can return with their eyes truly open. The end. About the author. Anya Lysander. Writing about love would be a craft learned by writing. Writing about love was the deepest pleasure. However, there were always problems when writing. Rather, writing was the painting of voice and emotion. I live and think outside the rules, and believe in personal power. Energy flows where the mind goes and helps me stay present. Writing gives you the strength to evolve. I still didn't understand that the more consciously I made decisions in my life, the stronger and more autonomous I would become. I live and think outside conventions, and energy flows where the mind goes. I write to better understand myself, find clarity about the past, situate myself in the present and future, and discover the best moments of this world. As my dear Virginia Woolf would say, it's a pity to never say what you feel. To me, writing means dissolving into these ancient stories and looking beyond the past, to the time when I was rejected, hurt, damaged and broken, where I suffered, where I fought, if that was the case. All I have done is write, and it has become good work. I hope this book has touched your souls. I love you all very much. I appreciate every comment. Everything you share with me means a lot. I live and think unconventionally, and believe in personal strength. Energy follows the flow of thoughts.